Hey guys, I know I've been gone for a while. I feel kind of bad about that because there's a lot of crazy shit going on. But it's good to see you, and I want to let you know that even though I was gone for a bit, I didn't stop searching for the truth while I was gone. Um, with the whole world kind of in chaos, it took me a minute to get my bearings, but I've got some good stuff to show you today, and I'm glad to be back. Okay, guys, so the main reason that I came back today to talk to you is that I found kind of a mind blowing open secret of sorts. It's called the Event 201 simulation. So, the Event 201 simulation was a quote unquote simulation of what a coronavirus outbreak would be like if it became a global pandemic. And this took place, was recorded and published at the end of November last year in 2019. And this was conducted by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Health Organization, and it was recorded at Johns Hopkins University. So, before I show you the footage of this simulation of a coronavirus outbreak, I know that sounds weird that I'm saying that because if you haven't seen any of this, it sounds funny, but just bear with me for a second. I want to give you a little background and show you some quotations from Bill Gates, who is considered definitely by himself and by a lot of people around the world as a global health expert, whatever the hell that means, public health expert, whatever the hell that means. Definitely, he's like the overlord of vaccines around the world. He funnels more money through his foundations towards the World Health Organization and dozens of other ABC organizations around the world than anyone besides the United States government. Bill Gates is a very powerful man in healthcare. I can't understand why, because I thought he was a computer guy. But Bill is very into vaccines and public health. He's also very into global warming. Let me show you some clips so we can get you caught up on the whole Bill Gates thinks he's God situation. Then I'm going to show you this Event 201 simulation, and a lot of the things that have happened over the last couple months are going to start to make sense to you.
And so we're in a wonderful situation with electricity in the rich world. But as we make it cheaper, and let's go for making it twice as cheap, we need to meet a new constraint. And that constraint has to do with CO2. CO2 is warming the planet. And the equation on CO2 is actually a very straightforward one. If you sum up the CO2 that gets emitted, that leads to a temperature increase. And that temperature increase leads to some very negative effects. The effects on the weather, perhaps worse, the indirect effects in that the natural ecosystems can't adjust to these rapid changes, and so you get ecosystem collapses. Now, the exact amount of how you map from a certain increase in of CO2 to what temperature will be and where the positive feedbacks are, there's some uncertainty there, but not very much. And there's certainly uncertainty about how bad those effects will be, but they will be extremely bad. I asked the top scientists on this several times, do we really have to get down to near zero? Can't we just, cut it in half or a quarter? And the answer is that until we get near to zero, the temperature will continue to rise. And so that's a big challenge. It's very different than saying, we're a 12-foot high truck trying to get under a 10-foot bridge and we can just sort of squeeze under. This is something that has to get to zero. And somehow we have to make changes that will bring that down to zero. It's been constantly going up. It's only various economic changes that have even flattened it at all. So we have to go from rapidly rising to falling and falling all the way to zero. This equation has four factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to zero. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to zero. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. That's back from high school algebra, but let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, health care, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
All right, so maybe I'm not hearing this correctly, but let me look at my notes. So, new vaccines, healthcare, and reproductive health services could lower the population of the entire Earth by 10 to 15%. Maybe I missed something, but when I was in school, they taught us that vaccines and healthcare were meant to help people live longer. So, a little confused by all this.
This is going to be a key one, and this is the amount of CO2 put out for each unit of energy. And so the question is, can you actually get that to zero? If you burn coal, no. If you burn natural gas, no. Almost every way we make electricity today, except for the emerging renewables and nuclear, puts out CO2. And so what we're going to have to do at a global scale is create a new system.
So did I hear this right? Bill Gates wants to create a new system for what? To reduce CO2 and reduce human population and energy consumption. Wow. That's an ambitious guy right there. Now, I know most of us remember Bill Gates as a computer guy, but I like to remember him from this event from 1998, which he'd probably like to forget. On one fateful day in 1998, Bill Gates showed up to a meeting and, much to his surprise, got bitch slapped in the face with a pie. Then he started crying, and then, oh shit, another pie. One more, right in the face. This is my favorite Bill Gates moment. Now, it kind of looks like he's crying there. Hold on. Yes, he's definitely crying. Thank you for that, Bill Gates. Okay, guys, now that I got you caught up a little bit on all of the Gates Foundation activities and his interest and involvement in the medical field and the world of vaccines and global warming, and especially since I got you caught up on the pie thing that happened, which was pretty important in my book, we're going to get serious for a second, and I'm going to show you the Event 201 coronavirus simulation that was conducted by the Gates Foundation, Johns Hopkins University, and the World Health Organization.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months, perhaps years ago. A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Gradually, farmers started getting sick. Infected people got a respiratory illness with symptoms ranging from mild flu-like signs to severe pneumonia. The sickest required intensive care. Many died. Experts agree, unless it is quickly controlled, it could lead to a severe pandemic, an outbreak that circles the globe and affects people everywhere.
The mission of the Pandemic Emergency Board is to provide recommendations to deal with the major global challenges arising in response to an unfolding pandemic. The board is comprised of highly experienced leaders from business, public health, and civil society.
We could be looking at double the number of cases in 1 week and 16 times as many in a month if we are not able to stop the spread. That would be on the order of 500,000 cases, and it would continue to rise exponentially. In 3 months, we could be approaching 10 million cases.
We're at the start of what's looking like it will be a severe pandemic. And there are problems emerging that can only be solved by global business and governments working together.
We have known about CAPS-like viruses in animals and people for decades, but have not been successful at developing a licensed vaccine. And sure, there are new technologies that may help, but it's going to be difficult. I am not optimistic about having a vaccine in time to be relevant during this pandemic.
So the policy crisis in question for this board in this meeting is this: how should governments, business, and international organizations allocate and distribute pandemic antivirals and medical supplies to the people who need them most?
What we've seen work very well in the HIV field is, in fact, procurement through the Global Fund. So having a centralized mechanism, so financially able to procure on behalf of affected countries would be critical. I think the second thing is it's going to be very important that for the business sector, for manufacturers of antivirals, that we have clarity around what the need is and where the need is and who are making the decisions.
I think that given that the countries most affected are those that are low and middle income countries with unequal access to technology, to finances, the UN has a worldwide footprint, universally recognized, and universal membership.
A global stockpile would certainly help ensure more rational and strategic allocation, but the reality is that we don't have the logistics capability, even within the UN, to bring that together in one place and run it. So this is where I think a collaboration between the international organizations like the World Health Organization and the private sector, which runs these supply chains for many purposes every day, understand where the supplies are, make smart decisions about how to allocate them to the people who need them in the places that need them the most, and then work with the industry to move those supplies from where they are today to where they need to be.
Just to underscore the point that cooperation among supply chain providers or businesses that have huge supply chains can add a lot of efficiency to the whole process.
The question is, can you, through this international mechanism, really promote commitments to doing this as quickly as possible and give people a sense that actually if they contribute more, that they will have a better chance of protecting their own populations and their country's security and health.
So to be completely clear, most of this production would already be committed in contracts.
Yes.
It is almost unheard of that people are producing product without having a forward commitment for the consumption of that product. So the first thing that needs to be done, because this is not something that the countries currently control, unless countries are going to bring about emergency situations and co-opt an existing supply chain.
I think it's not likely, I agree, that countries are not going to buy countermeasure to put into a global supply without retaining a large portion of it for themselves.
Public health agencies have issued travel advisories, while some countries have banned travel from the worst affected areas. As a result, the travel sector is taking a huge hit. Travel bookings are down 45%, and many flights have been canceled. A ripple effect is racing through the service sector. Governments that rely on travel and tourism as a large part of their economies are being hit particularly hard.
How should national leaders, businesses, and international organizations balance the risk of worsening disease that would be caused by the continued movement of people around the world against the risks of profound economic consequence of travel and trade bans?
If there's some sense that there's a UN institution that can do all of this, then I worry we're suffering from a delusional disorder on the power of the UN. It's really important to get those industries and their trade associations and an efficient leadership established, which is decentralized, but has a collective responsibility and accountability. And that needs to be supported by the public leadership.
What is essential, what is non-essential travel, we have to clarify this. Otherwise, if we go down to 20% bookings over a long period, the company will run down. That's a fact.
You know, there's a whole complex set of issues in a highly interdependent world on supply chains that are just in time. We need to think about how much flex there is in that just-in-time supply chain system and make sure it keeps running. I think it's going to take specificity, and it's going to take knowledge that only the private sector has. The UN can play an important coordinating facilitation role, but the companies know where those commodities are, where they move, how to move them, and that's where a type of public-private collaboration that we have not generally had in these crises needs to be put together pretty quickly.
We are not out of money yet, but the fact is we are trending in a dangerous direction and something needs to change.
So the policy question for this board now is how should financial resources be prioritized? Are there nodes that we cannot allow to fail? What is your sense of priorities? We don't have money to pay for all of these urgent problems.
So at the moment, we want the funds, right? You need the money. So where's the money? So government kind of supplies some money. A lot of, private sectors, some are sitting here, you have some money, but now you need a really coordinated, centralized efforts.
Hotels will be experiencing, crippling losses doing that. And we know that the hotel business in itself makes up 5% of the GDP.
Governments need to be willing to do things that are out of their historical perspective, or for the most part, it's really a war footing that we need to be on.
We shouldn't underestimate the power of entrepreneurship. We need to escalate that, whether it's through the government's helping with tax breaks or subsidies of that nature to increase manufacturing of those types of products. It can happen quickly. A Marshall-type plan, don't mean to say that exactly, but a Marshall plan that can go into effect can stimulate change very quickly.
Countries are reacting in different ways as to how best to manage the overwhelming amounts of dis and misinformation circulating over the internet. In some cases, limited internet shutdowns are being implemented to quell panic.
How much control of information should there be, and by whom? And how can false information be effectively challenged? And what if that false information is coming from companies or from governments?
I think it's very important that we make sure that there is concise communication with all healthcare facilities where these patients are being treated so that there isn't mass panic.
We're at a moment where the social media platforms have to step forward and recognize the moment to assert that they're a technology platform and not a broadcaster is over. They, in fact, have to be a participant in broadcasting accurate information and partnering with the scientific and health communities to counterweight, if not flood the zone of accurate information, because to put the genie back in the bottle of the misinformation and disinformation is nigh impossible.
One thing we haven't spoken about, and I'm wondering whether it's time to talk about this, is a step up from the part of the governments on enforcement actions against fake news.
I personally do not believe that trying to shut things down in terms of information is either practical or desirable. And we do have, I think, a couple of strategies that are available to us, one of which is the flood strategy, second of which is relying and informing and equipping trusted sources of information with the facts so they can then pass that on. But we also need to actually think about a technological answer to this.
The outcome of the CAPS pandemic in Event 201 was catastrophic. 65 million people died in the first 18 months. The outbreak was small at first and initially seemed controllable, but then it started spreading in densely crowded and impoverished neighborhoods of megacities. From that point on, the spread of the disease was explosive. Within 6 months, cases were occurring in nearly every country. The global economy was in a free fall. The GDP down 11%. Stock markets around the world plummeted between 20 and 40% and headed into a downward cycle of fear and low expectation. Businesses were not borrowing, banks were not lending. Everyone was just hoping to hunker down and weather the storm. Economists say the economic turmoil caused by such a pandemic will last for years, perhaps a decade. The societal impacts, the loss of faith in government, the distrust of news, and the breakdown of social cohesion could last even longer. We have to ask, did this need to be so bad? Are there things we could have done in the 5 to 10 years leading up to the pandemic that would have lessened the catastrophic consequences? We believe the answer is yes. So, are we as a global community now finally ready to do the hard work needed to prepare for the next pandemic.
So if this is your first time seeing the Event 201 simulation, I'm sure you've got a lot of ideas running through your head and a lot of questions. I've watched it like 6 or 7 times now, and I could throw out a lot of theories about what I think is going on, but I'm going to try to stick more in the territory of asking questions. But I will make one statement that is very important to consider when you watch this, and it's that this was not a preventative exercise. Not a preventative exercise. They were not speculating about how to stop the virus from spreading to the United States. And it's important to note that a lot of the representatives here are, from the American CDC and from a lot of big-time American companies like Marriott and Henry Schein, which produces medical supplies, who obviously has a huge interest in all this stuff. These American-based companies were not talking about American solutions. They were talking about a plan for a global situation. Kind of goes back to what I've talked about in a lot of my videos, guys. Corporations now, which I haven't talked about, but they're like a lot of these politicians. They see the world as a global marketplace, as a global community. They don't have national allegiances. Even if they live next door to you, even if they are, set up shop in your hometown, they don't really consider you a neighbor if you're not part of this global community. And that is an important takeaway. A few of the other questions that I had: why are they talking about altering supply chains? They're talking about predetermined production. What exactly does that mean? And what is it that they were predetermining production for? The lovely gentleman from the Henry Schein Company, which produces medical supplies, he said something about a Marshall Plan. Sounds like martial law to me, which in some parts of the world they're actually doing, and in America we're only a couple steps away from it. It depends on what state you're in. Okay, and maybe the scariest thing that you see here in this video is them talking about stopping the spread of false information. Who decides what the false information is? Is false information like when the World Health Organization at the beginning of the year said that this virus couldn't be transmitted from human to human? Is that false information? Because Google and the big tech companies and social media companies, they don't have any problem spreading that false information. More likely, false information is a guy like me who actually wants to come on here and ask questions and show you some of this stuff. And one last thing that I have questions and I would like to get feedback from you guys on. If you notice that somebody in the video, when they're talking about controlling the flow of information, they mentioned something called a flood strategy. And to me, that sounds like flooding your narrative into the mainstream media outlets so that it's all cohesive across the mainstream media outlets. And so then if you have a differing opinion, well, you must be wrong because you don't match the official narrative. Oh, and they said trusted sources. Like who? CNN? Fox News? Guys, if you still think Fox News is a patriotic, pro-America company, you're about 5 or 10 years late to the game. Okay, but so in the name of being constructive, instead of just pointing out a bunch of problems, the question after I watched this 4 or 5 times that kept running through my head is, what is the common connection that all these companies have that would bring them together for something like this? These are very busy people, and these are multi-billion-dollar corporations, so they don't just get together to roast marshmallows and make s'mores for no reason. But there has to be a common bond between these businesses from different industries. And that connection exists inside the Big 5 consulting firms. And one of those Big 5 firms is McKinsey & Company. And the former head of McKinsey & Company was recently interviewed by Tucker Carlson, and also I think he was on MSNBC. I've got a clip I'm about to show you. But this is a guy who is an American citizen who's done a lot of business in China, and his company and companies like his interact with all of these big-time companies. And I think that's where you get a lot of the similar reactions from different states, different different companies and different industries, it comes from these interactions that they have with people like this Peter Walker, who I'm about to show you. If you're not familiar with the Peter Walker or with McKinsey & Company, here's a quick, about a 60-second breakdown to catch you up.
To outsiders, they're simply a consulting firm. But the biggest hitters in corporate America, McKinsey is an indispensable tool. From boardrooms to the White House and beyond, McKinsey's influence over a century in business is virtually unparalleled. It's where executives turn to advice and where boards go when they need a new CEO. For those who aren't familiar with McKinsey, what do they do? How big are they? What are their revenues?
McKinsey, they're management consultants. So they help with corner office decisions when the CEO has the question, what do we do? What do we do next? What do we do about this problem that we have? They have about 7 or 8 billion in revenues. They're private, so it's not exactly clear, which is relatively large, but it's
certainly smaller than the companies they advise.
Absolutely. Historically, they've been inside every, if not most of the major companies in this country, if not the world.
So they are problem solvers. They come in and they give advice. They don't execute. They don't come in and manage.
No, and that's actually the beauty of their business model. They take no credit publicly for advice that turned out to be the wrong stuff, but they also take no blame.
A lot of people call them the farm team for CEOs.
Absolutely.
True?
Yeah, there was a study USA Today did a couple of years ago which named them the top generator of CEOs the world's ever seen. At any one time, dozens are running multi-billion-dollar public companies.
Look at that list of them, including a couple of people we could call, well, crooks, basically. Jeff Skilling, Gupta, those guys. They don't get it right every time, and Enron was one of the shining examples of where the best and the brightest clearly didn't get it right.
Management in McKinsey are eager to fawn over the Chinese government, one of the most repressive regimes in the world. In an interview with China's government news service, for example, McKinsey's senior partner Peter Walker came off like a smitten teenager, all aflutter. Quote, "What I discovered in China was the people were happy. They were proud. They were energized. The government officials I met genuinely wanted to do the right thing for the people." Well, as it turned out, that was just a taste of Walker's effusive praise for the Communist government of China. Here's more.
I think the Chinese people have realized that whenever they're upset by anything that happens, whether it was the Sichuan earthquake or SARS or what's going on with the price of pork, I think the people speak out loud and clear, and I think the government is largely responsive. But, to me, that's just part of a system where they define democracy as responsive to the people. And I think they tend to do that reasonably well.
This is not illegal what we are doing. We are reporters. We are reporting in a public space. Ow.
Listen, guys, Taiwan and Singapore were screening for this in their airports in January. Why weren't we? Our CDC guy is at this Event 201 simulation. What was he there for? Pretty good question. I wish I knew the answer. Listen, I am pleading with you guys. If you are not letting your elected officials know how you feel about this stuff, you're complicit. Send a tweet, send an email, a carrier pigeon, whatever your preferred technology is, but let them know how you feel. I know I talked about this in the last video. You cannot complain, you cannot sit around and be uncomfortable with this if you're not communicating with them. It's our job as the electorate. One last thing before we go, I want to show you this tweet that Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York released a couple days ago about remaking the education system in New York State. Andrew Cuomo on Twitter: "As we prepare to reopen, we have the opportunity to reimagine and build back our education system better. We will work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to develop a blueprint to do this. If you're from New York State, I want to know if you guys voted for Bill Gates and Melinda Gates to be the head of education in your state, or the governor, or anything else. My guess is no. Listen, guys, it's good to see you again. I wish I had something more fun to talk about, but I'm glad to be back, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe.